Ego is a fundamental part of who we are, shaping how we perceive ourselves and interact with the world. At its core, ego is the sense of self-importance or identity, the voice inside that says, "I matter," or "I am in control." It serves a purpose in our lives by helping us navigate the world, assert boundaries, and protect ourselves from harm. However, when left unchecked or overly inflated, ego can become a barrier to meaningful connections, including love. It can distort our perception of others and prevent us from seeing beyond our own narrow viewpoint. At its extreme, ego can lead to self-centeredness, where we are so focused on our own needs, desires, and self-image that we struggle to truly understand or empathize with others. In relationships, this becomes especially problematic. Instead of connecting with someone on an emotional or spiritual level, we may find ourselves more concerned with how we are perceived, whether we're being admired or validated, or if our needs are being met. The result is that genuine love, which requires selflessness and empathy, becomes hard to cultivate. Ego makes love conditional, where we only give when we expect something in return. Love, however, is not about keeping score. It's about giving without expecting, understanding without judgment, and connecting without barriers. This fixation on ego can manifest in countless ways. For example, in conversations, we might dominate the discussion, steering it back to ourselves, or only showing interest in topics that validate our experiences. In romantic relationships, ego can manifest as possessiveness, jealousy, or a constant need for reassurance, all stemming from a deep-seated insecurity that, at its core, arises from the ego's fragile need for control and affirmation. When ego is too strong, it becomes a filter through which we see the world, and it distorts the way we perceive others' actions and intentions. In this context, ego doesn't just exist as an isolated concept. It influences every interaction, decision, and belief we hold. It plays a major role in how we interpret situations, judge others, and even interpret acts of love. If we are constantly preoccupied with protecting our image, we may struggle to love others without conditions, as love asks us to step outside of ourselves and care for others' well-being just as much as we care for our own. Thus, while ego has its place in helping us assert ourselves and protect our individuality, when it overshadows our ability to connect with others on a deeper level, it creates distance. This distancing makes it harder for love to flow freely, as ego, with all its insecurities and self-preservation instincts, blocks the path. Love is often viewed as the ultimate expression of selflessness. It's a force that transcends the ego, creating connections that go beyond our individual needs or desires. True love isn't about receiving validation or fulfilling personal desires. It's about giving without expecting anything in return, offering understanding and compassion without judgment, and embracing the other person for who they truly are, without trying to mold them into something that aligns with our own ego-driven wants. At its core, love is about empathy, the ability to step into someone else's shoes, to feel what they feel, and to understand their experiences. This deep sense of connection requires an openness that ego simply cannot provide. When we are consumed by our ego, we become too focused on ourselves. Our thoughts, actions, and responses are all filtered through the lens of self-interest. What does this mean for me? How does this situation affect my image or my sense of importance? In contrast, love urges us to let go of the need to control or dominate the narrative. It compels us to look beyond our own desires and acknowledge the humanity in others. In relationships, this kind of love is most often unconditional. It means accepting others without attempting to change them, understanding them without judgment, and offering support without the expectation of reciprocation. The love that transcends ego allows people to be vulnerable with each other, knowing that they can be seen for who they truly are. It nurtures trust, respect, and a sense of safety that allows both individuals to grow and evolve freely. But love is not just about romantic relationships. It extends into our interactions with friends, family, and even strangers. When we love without ego, we are able to offer kindness, patience, and understanding without the need to be recognized or praised for it. True love, in its purest form, is about connecting to others on a deep, human level, rather than using them to fulfill our own emotional needs or to bolster our own sense of identity. Moreover, love requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is often hindered by the ego. Ego shields us from discomfort, fear, and emotional exposure by constantly pushing us to protect ourselves. It tells us to maintain control, to keep up walls, and to ensure that we always come out looking good. Love, on the other hand, asks us to let down those walls and be open to others' flaws, mistakes, and imperfections. When we remove the barriers that ego creates, we can begin to form authentic connections that are rooted in care and understanding rather than pride and self-interest. Thus, love at its core is a force that defies the limitations of ego. It asks us to look beyond ourselves and to give freely, without concern for how we might benefit or how we might be perceived. It calls us to embrace the vulnerability and beauty of human connection, even if it means stepping outside our comfort zones and confronting our own insecurities. And in doing so, love allows us to connect with others in ways that ego simply cannot facilitate. Ego often stands as the first barrier we must face when seeking to truly love and connect with others. It's a natural part of human nature, a force that arises to protect and define us. However, it's through confronting and understanding our ego that we begin the journey toward real love and meaningful relationships. The reality is that before love can fully manifest in our lives, our ego often needs to be acknowledged, tamed, or even transformed. When we are overwhelmed by our ego, it acts as a filter through which we view the world. We judge others not for who they truly are, but for how they fit into our preconceived notions of what we need or want. When ego is allowed to dominate, it often creates the illusion that we are the center of the universe. We interpret the actions of others not in terms of their needs, desires, or intentions, but in terms of how those actions impact us. This self-centeredness can prevent us from seeing others clearly and from embracing them in their entirety. Instead, we see them only in relation to ourselves. For example, if someone challenges our views, ego feels threatened, leading us to either dismiss or react defensively, rather than listening with an open mind or heart. This defensive posture weakens relationships as we are no longer engaging with the other person authentically, but rather with our own personal insecurities. The process of confronting our ego is often difficult because it requires us to step back from the immediate desire to protect our image or prove our worth. It demands that we accept vulnerability and acknowledge our limitations, something that ego actively resists. Ego wants us to be invulnerable, perfect, and superior, and it tells us that showing any weakness is a sign of failure. But love, real love, can't thrive under such conditions. Love requires honesty, openness, and humility, qualities that ego frequently suppresses. When we confront our ego, we must face the uncomfortable truth that our insecurities, fears, and judgments have been leading our interactions and relationships. This realization is often painful, but it's also liberating. It gives us the opportunity to shift our focus away from ourselves and toward the people we care about. By recognizing the ways our ego limits our capacity for connection, we free ourselves to experience love more deeply and authentically. In relationships, whether personal, romantic, or even professional, the dominance of ego can create unnecessary conflict and distance. If we are constantly operating from a place of ego, we will interpret even the most neutral or innocent actions as threats or challenges to our sense of self. For instance, if someone offers us constructive criticism, ego can distort it into a personal attack, causing us to react defensively rather than reflecting on the feedback. We may also become possessive or controlling in relationships, driven by the fear of losing our identity or status. When ego is running the show, we may prioritize being right or maintaining control over truly listening, empathizing, or compromising. This creates tension and emotional walls between individuals, making it difficult for love to thrive. Instead of being present with one another, we are focused on defending or enhancing our self-image, often at the expense of connection and understanding. It is only by recognizing this dynamic that we can begin to take steps toward transforming it. When we see how our ego shapes our relationships, we can start to make conscious choices to engage from a place of humility, understanding, and compassion. This doesn't mean erasing our sense of self, but rather learning to manage ego in a way that allows love to take precedence. We must learn to acknowledge when our ego is at play and take a step back from the impulse to protect ourselves. We can start by practicing active listening, being present with others without judgment, and recognizing that love is not about winning or controlling, but about connection and mutual respect. As we begin to manage our ego, we open ourselves up to the possibility of deeper, more fulfilling relationships that are not tainted by the need for validation, but enriched by a genuine desire to connect and support one another. Managing ego in relationships is one of the most essential skills we can develop if we hope to build deeper, more meaningful connections. Our ego often influences our actions, thoughts, and reactions in ways that we don't fully recognize. It drives us to seek validation, to protect our self-image, and to avoid vulnerability. These are natural impulses, but when allowed to dominate our behavior, they can prevent us from forming genuine bonds with others. Recognizing the role of ego in relationships is the first step in managing it effectively. It's about developing awareness of when our ego is influencing our thoughts and actions, allowing us to pause, reflect, and choose a more compassionate, loving response. By doing so, we can begin to let go of the need for control and embrace a more collaborative, understanding way of relating to others. When we are not aware of the way ego operates in our relationships, it can show up in subtle and destructive ways. For instance, we might find ourselves trying to dominate conversations, always steering discussions back to ourselves or our own experiences. We may interrupt others, believing that our thoughts are more important or valuable, or we may become defensive when someone offers feedback or criticism. Ego can also manifest as insecurity, causing us to overcompensate by acting arrogantly or pretending to know more than we do. We might also be prone to making comparisons, measuring our worth against the success or failures of others. All of these behaviors hinder the development of authentic, healthy relationships. When we manage our ego, we create space for others to express themselves, for vulnerability to exist, and for trust to grow. We stop viewing every interaction through the lens of how does this affect me, and instead open ourselves up to how can I understand and support the other person. One of the most challenging aspects of managing ego is the way it feeds on our insecurities. Ego thrives in an environment of fear and self-doubt. When we feel uncertain about our worth, our ego comes to the forefront to protect us, often in ways that are counterproductive to healthy relationships. We may put up walls to shield ourselves from being hurt or rejected, but in doing so, we create emotional distance from those around us. Managing ego involves becoming aware of our vulnerabilities and understanding that it's okay to be imperfect, to make mistakes, and to experience failure. It's about allowing ourselves to be human and trusting that true love and connection don't require perfection. When we manage our ego, we learn to accept ourselves as we are, which, in turn, allows us to accept others more fully. We no longer need to project an idealized version of ourselves or expect others to do the same. Instead, we embrace authenticity, vulnerability, and mutual growth. A key aspect of managing ego in relationships is learning to let go of the need to be right. Our ego often pushes us to protect our ideas, opinions, and beliefs at all costs. which can create tension and conflict in conversations and disagreements. We may become attached to our own perspective, insisting that it is the only valid one, or we may feel threatened when others challenge our views. This desire to always be right can stifle communication, prevent collaboration, and block the possibility of growth in relationships. By managing our ego, we can learn to embrace humility and recognize that being right isn't as important as being open, understanding, and compassionate. We can learn to listen without judgment, to consider the perspectives of others, and to approach disagreements with curiosity rather than defensiveness. This doesn't mean we have to agree with everyone all the time, but it does mean that we approach conversations with a sense of respect and a willingness to learn rather than with a need to dominate or win. In doing so, we create an environment where love, trust, and understanding can flourish. Finally, managing ego in relationships is about choosing connection over competition. Our ego often drives us to compete, whether it's for attention, affection, or validation. We compare ourselves to others, measuring our worth by how we stack up against them. This mindset creates an unhealthy dynamic in relationships, where we're constantly focused on ourselves and our own status rather than on the connection we share with others. When we manage our ego, we shift from a mindset of competition to one of collaboration. We learn to celebrate the successes of others without feeling threatened, to support and uplift those around us rather than seeking to outshine them. Love thrives in an environment where both people feel valued, respected, and supported, rather than in a relationship that is dominated by ego-driven rivalry. By choosing connection over competition, we open ourselves up to the possibility of mutual growth, trust, and unconditional support, qualities that form the foundation of lasting, loving relationships. Finding the right balance between ego and love is crucial for fostering meaningful and healthy relationships. The challenge often lies in recognizing that while ego is a natural and necessary part of human existence, it can easily overshadow love if not properly managed. Ego has a way of shaping our perception of the world, influencing the decisions we make and the way we engage with others. It encourages us to see ourselves as the focal point of every interaction, often causing us to prioritize our own needs and desires over the well-being of others. This self-centered approach can prevent us from offering love freely, because love requires us to see beyond our own ego and to embrace the feelings, thoughts, and needs of others. Balancing ego and love is not about eliminating the ego entirely, but about learning to keep it in check so that love can flourish in a more genuine, unconditional manner. The first step toward achieving this balance is to develop a deeper understanding of the ego's role in our lives. Ego is often tied to our sense of self, worth, and identity. It thrives on validation and recognition, making it hard to let go of our personal desires and embrace love in its purest form. In relationships, the ego can manifest in various ways, such as through the desire for approval, the need for control, or the fear of vulnerability. These ego-driven tendencies can create friction, preventing us from being truly present with others. The key is to recognize when our ego is driving our actions and to consciously choose to shift the focus from ourselves to the other person. By becoming more self-aware, we can begin to identify when our ego is in charge and make the decision to let love guide us instead. Another important aspect of balancing ego and love is learning how to manage expectations. Ego often comes with a set of expectations about how others should behave, what we deserve, or what we are entitled to. These expectations can be limiting and create frustration when they are not met. Love, however, requires us to release these rigid expectations and to approach relationships with an open heart. When we are led by love, we allow people to be themselves without judgment or the need to conform to our idea of what they should be. The more we let go of our ego-driven expectations, the more we create space for love to flow freely. This doesn't mean we should tolerate unhealthy behavior, but rather that we should allow people the room to grow and evolve without constantly measuring them against our own desires or standards. It's also crucial to recognize that love is inherently vulnerable, and vulnerability is something that ego often avoids. The ego's primary function is to protect us, to shield us from hurt, failure, and rejection. It does this by building walls around our hearts, creating a barrier between us and others. Love, on the other hand, asks us to break down those walls and to open ourselves to the possibility of being hurt, because it is only through vulnerability that we can truly connect with others. Managing ego involves being willing to let go of the need to control how others perceive us and allowing ourselves to be seen for who we truly are. It means embracing our flaws, weaknesses, and uncertainties without fear of judgment. This vulnerability is essential for deep, meaningful love, and it can only thrive when we are willing to set our ego aside and embrace our authentic selves and the authenticity of others. Equally important is the ability to cultivate compassion and empathy. When ego is in control, we often become too focused on our own experiences, emotions, and needs. Our attention is drawn inward, and we may fail to recognize the struggles or feelings of others. Love, on the other hand, requires us to step outside of ourselves and to see the world from another person's perspective. Compassion and empathy are essential to this process, as they allow us to connect with others on a deeper emotional level. When we manage our ego, we are better able to listen with an open heart, to offer support without judgment, and to truly understand what others are going through. This kind of connection enriches relationships and creates a foundation of trust and mutual respect that is vital for love to grow. Finally, achieving a healthy balance between ego and love means learning to practice humility. Ego often leads us to believe that we know best, that our perspective is the right one, or that we are superior to others in some way. This mindset creates division and prevents us from truly connecting with people on an equal footing. Love, however, thrives on equality, respect, and shared humanity. Humility allows us to recognize that we are all flawed, imperfect beings, and that no one is more deserving of love than anyone else. It invites us to approach others with a sense of openness and respect, without judgment or the need to prove our superiority. By practicing humility, we create a more harmonious balance between ego and love, where we can love others for who they are, without the need for control or validation. In this space, love can be freely given and received, without the interference of ego-driven desires or insecurities. The balance between ego and love is a delicate dance that we must navigate in all of our relationships, whether they be romantic, familial, or even professional. Ego is an inherent part of being human. It shapes our self-perception and guides us in how we interact with the world around us. However, when ego is allowed to dominate our actions and decisions, it can significantly hinder our ability to truly love and connect with others. At its core, ego is driven by the need for self-preservation, the desire to maintain our sense of identity and control. It convinces us that we need to protect ourselves from hurt, vulnerability, and failure, often at the expense of deeper connections. On the other hand, love calls us to look beyond ourselves, to embrace others with empathy and understanding. The challenge lies in understanding how our ego operates and learning to set it aside when it comes to building meaningful relationships. It is not about rejecting ego altogether, but learning to manage it so that love can shine through. One of the key ways ego manifests itself is through defensiveness. When our ego is threatened, it reacts by trying to protect us from any perceived harm, often leading to defensive behaviors. This is especially apparent in moments of conflict or disagreement, where we may feel attacked or misunderstood. Rather than engaging with the other person's perspective, ego drives us to defend our position, to prove that we are right and that our point of view is valid. This defensiveness creates a barrier in communication, preventing us from truly listening or understanding the other person's feelings. When love is at the forefront, we are more open to hearing what others have to say, even if it challenges our own beliefs or makes us uncomfortable. We can listen without reacting immediately, acknowledging the other person's feelings and responding with empathy rather than a knee-jerk defensive response. Managing ego means recognizing when we are about to react out of defensiveness and taking a step back to create space for a more thoughtful, loving response. Another powerful aspect of ego in relationships is the desire for validation and recognition. Ego thrives on affirmation and praise. It craves acknowledgement and approval from others. This desire for validation can often overshadow our ability to give love freely, as we may begin to love others based on what we receive in return. This transactional approach to love is not sustainable because it ties love to conditions and expectations. We may love someone because they validate our sense of worth, or because they provide us with something we feel we need. However, this conditional love is ultimately shallow and self-serving. True love, in contrast, is unconditional. It requires us to love others for who they are, without expecting anything in return. When we manage our ego and let go of the need for constant validation, we open ourselves up to a deeper, more selfless form of love. We begin to love others not because they give us something, but because we genuinely care about their well-being, happiness, and growth. Ego also tends to thrive on comparison. It constantly measures our worth against the success, achievements, or qualities of others. This comparison can be especially damaging in relationships, where we may find ourselves measuring our partner, friends, or colleagues against an idealized version of someone else. When we operate from a place of ego, we may begin to feel insecure or inadequate if we believe that others have more, do more, or are better in some way. This mindset breeds competition rather than cooperation, creating unnecessary tension and resentment. When we are able to manage our ego, we stop comparing ourselves to others and instead focus on our own growth and contributions. We can begin to appreciate others for who they are, without the need to measure them against some external standard. In relationships, this shift allows us to support and encourage those around us rather than competing with them, leading to deeper, more fulfilling connections built on mutual respect and admiration. One of the most challenging aspects of managing ego is its tendency to create a sense of separation. Ego feeds on the illusion of difference. It wants to make distinctions between me and them, highlighting what sets us apart rather than what unites us. This sense of separation can cause us to build walls between ourselves and others, preventing us from connecting on a deeper emotional or spiritual level. Love, on the other hand, transcends this sense of separation. It calls us to recognize our shared humanity, to see the inherent value in every person, regardless of their background, beliefs, or differences. When we manage our ego, we can let go of the need to separate ourselves from others and begin to embrace the interconnectedness of all people. We can see that at our core, we all experience pain, joy, fear, and hope, and that these shared emotions form the foundation of our connections. Love flourishes when we break down the barriers of separation and approach others with compassion, understanding, and an open heart. The ego also plays a significant role in our attachment to outcomes. When we are driven by ego, we often focus on the end result, whether that be achieving a particular goal, receiving a certain outcome, or gaining recognition. We may become fixated on the future, worrying about what we can gain or how we will be perceived. This attachment to outcomes can create anxiety, stress, and dissatisfaction as we become overly focused on what is not yet in our control. Love, however, is present and patient. It exists in the moment, not in the future or the past. When we manage our ego, we can learn to let go of the need for control and outcomes and instead focus on the present moment and the people we are with. We can embrace the journey of love rather than fixating on where it might lead. This shift in perspective allows us to experience life with a greater sense of peace and joy, knowing that love is not about the destination, but about the connections we create along the way. Lastly, managing ego in relationships requires the ability to practice self-compassion. When ego is in control, we are often harshly self-critical. We believe that we must always be perfect, strong, and in control, and any deviation from this ideal feels like failure. This inner critic can prevent us from embracing vulnerability, from being kind to ourselves, and from allowing love to flow freely. True love requires us to accept ourselves fully, with all of our flaws, imperfections, and mistakes. When we manage our ego, we become more patient and compassionate with ourselves, recognizing that we are worthy of love, even in our moments of weakness or failure. This self-compassion allows us to be more forgiving of ourselves and others, creating space for love to grow and flourish. It teaches us that love is not about perfection, but about acceptance, growth, and connection. The dynamic between ego and love is one of the most intricate aspects of human interaction, particularly when it comes to forming and sustaining meaningful relationships. Ego is an integral part of who we are. It shapes how we perceive the world, how we express ourselves, and how we interact with others. It serves as a tool for self-preservation and identity formation, helping us navigate social structures and protect our emotional well-being. However, when ego becomes too dominant, it can create barriers to genuine love and connection. At its core, ego is driven by the desire to feel important, validated, and in control. It compels us to view the world through the lens of self-interest, often making it difficult to truly understand and connect with others. Love, on the other hand, invites us to transcend the confines of ego, to embrace vulnerability, and to see the inherent worth in others beyond our own needs. To experience authentic love, we must learn how to balance our ego's desires with the selflessness required for love to truly thrive. A key aspect of managing ego in relationships is recognizing the role that fear plays in its dominance. Fear is one of the strongest motivators behind ego-driven behavior. Whether it's the fear of rejection, failure, or being misunderstood, ego often operates as a defense mechanism, shielding us from the vulnerability that love demands. When we feel insecure or threatened, our ego steps in to protect us, often by building walls around our hearts or deflecting emotional intimacy. This fear-driven behavior can make it difficult to form genuine connections because it prevents us from being open, honest, and emotionally available. Love, however, requires us to let go of these fears and to embrace vulnerability. It asks us to show up as our true selves without the armor of ego to protect us. In this way, managing ego involves recognizing the fears that fuel it and consciously choosing to move beyond them in order to engage with others more authentically. Ego also often manifests in the form of pride, which can be one of the most insidious obstacles to love. Pride is the belief that we are superior to others, that we deserve more, or that we are always right. When we allow pride to govern our interactions, we create an environment of judgment and superiority, rather than one of mutual respect and equality. Pride causes us to elevate our own opinions and desires over those of others, which can lead to imbalanced relationships where love is not truly shared. We may refuse to admit when we are wrong, resist apologizing, or become so fixated on being right that we disregard the feelings and needs of others. True love, in contrast, is grounded in humility and mutual respect. It requires us to set aside our pride and acknowledge that we are not always perfect, that we make mistakes, and that we are no more deserving of love than anyone else. By managing our pride and embracing humility, we can create deeper, more authentic connections with others, where love is not tainted by the need to prove ourselves or assert our superiority. Another critical aspect of balancing ego and love is learning to manage expectations. Ego often feeds on unrealistic or rigid expectations about what we deserve or how others should behave. These expectations can set us up for disappointment and frustration, as they place an undue burden on others to meet our needs or conform to our ideals. When we approach relationships with ego-driven expectations, we may begin to view others as tools to fulfill our desires, rather than as whole, independent individuals with their own wants and needs. Love, however, requires us to let go of these rigid expectations and to embrace others as they are. It calls us to accept the imperfections and flaws of those we love, understanding that they are not here to fulfill our personal agendas. When we manage our ego and let go of expectations, we open ourselves up to the possibility of unconditional love, where we appreciate others for who they truly are, without trying to control or mold them into something they are not. Ego's need for control is another significant factor that can undermine the development of genuine love. When we are overly attached to our ego, we often feel the need to control our environment, the people in our lives, and even the direction of our relationships. This desire for control is rooted in fear, the fear of uncertainty, the fear of being hurt, or the fear of not getting what we want. However, control can be stifling and suffocating in relationships, preventing both people from growing and evolving freely. Love, on the other hand, requires trust and the willingness to let go. It asks us to surrender control, to allow the relationship to develop naturally, and to trust that both parties will bring something valuable to the table. Managing ego means recognizing when we are trying to control or manipulate the situation and choosing to step back, allowing space for love to flourish. It requires faith in the process of the relationship, understanding that love is not something that can be forced or manipulated, but something that grows organically when both people are willing to be open and vulnerable with each other. In addition to the need for control, ego often thrives on validation and external approval. When we are driven by ego, we may seek validation from others in order to feel worthy, important, or loved. This external validation can come in many forms: praise, admiration, recognition, or affection. However, love does not depend on external validation. True love is rooted in acceptance and appreciation, not in the need to be constantly affirmed by others. When we seek validation from others, we put the power of our emotional well-being in their hands, leaving us vulnerable to disappointment and insecurity. Love, however, is empowering because it comes from within. When we manage our ego and stop seeking external validation, we free ourselves from the cycle of needing others to define our worth. We learn to love ourselves for who we are, and in doing so, we are able to love others more deeply and selflessly, without the need for validation or recognition. This shift allows us to form relationships based on mutual respect and understanding, rather than on a constant quest for external approval. Another challenge that ego presents in relationships is the way it fosters emotional distance. Ego often keeps us trapped in our own self-centered world, making it difficult to truly connect with others on a deep emotional level. When our ego is in control, we are constantly preoccupied with our own feelings, needs, and desires. We may be so focused on protecting our image or asserting our worth that we fail to truly see the needs of others. Love, however, requires emotional presence and connection. It asks us to be fully engaged with others, to listen attentively, and to respond with empathy and understanding. Managing ego means learning to step outside of our own emotional preoccupations and to tune into the feelings and experiences of others. It means being present in the moment, allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, and creating an emotional space where both people can connect authentically. When we manage our ego and create space for emotional connection, we foster deeper intimacy and trust in our relationships, allowing love to grow naturally and unconditionally. Finally, ego's tendency to compare and compete with others can create significant barriers to love. When we are focused on our own ego, we often measure our worth by comparing ourselves to others. We may compare our success, appearance, achievements, or relationships to those of others, constantly feeling the need to prove ourselves or outshine others. This competitive mindset fosters insecurity and jealousy, undermining our ability to celebrate the success and happiness of others. Love, on the other hand, thrives on support, celebration, and mutual growth. It is not about competing with others or seeking to be better than them. It is about building each other up, encouraging each other's growth, and finding joy in one another's success. Managing ego means learning to embrace the success of others without feeling threatened, to support and uplift those around us, and to find joy in the collective growth and success of all. When we let go of the need to compete, we create an environment where love can flourish freely and relationships can thrive without the constraints of comparison and competition. The interplay between ego and love is an essential aspect of human relationships, and understanding the nuances of this dynamic can dramatically improve how we interact with others. Ego is an inherent part of human nature, tied to our sense of self and survival instincts. It shapes how we view ourselves in the world, influences how we perceive others, and ultimately guides our interactions. While ego is necessary for maintaining a sense of identity and self-worth, when it is left unchecked, it can overshadow love and hinder the development of meaningful relationships. Love, in its purest form, requires us to look beyond ourselves, to embrace others in their entirety, flaws and all. Managing ego is not about eliminating it altogether, but learning to recognize when it is obstructing love and taking active steps to keep it in balance. One of the key obstacles that ego presents in relationships is its tendency to foster a sense of self-centeredness. When we are driven primarily by ego, our world becomes very much about our own experiences, needs, and desires. This self-centeredness leads us to prioritize our own comfort, security, and validation over the well-being of others. In relationships, this translates into behavior that seeks constant affirmation or attention from others, rather than offering genuine love and care in return. Ego-driven individuals may struggle to empathize with the feelings or needs of others because their own interests always take precedence. True love, however, requires a level of selflessness and empathy. Love asks us to put the needs of others alongside our own, to listen attentively to their concerns, and to offer support without expecting anything in return. It calls for us to engage in relationships that are balanced, where both parties give and receive love freely. When we manage our ego and allow room for others in our hearts and minds, love can flourish in a space of mutual understanding and support. Alongside self-centeredness, ego can also create a profound sense of insecurity which manifests in fear of rejection, judgment, or failure. The ego thrives on external validation and may become fragile when it perceives a threat to its sense of self. This vulnerability to insecurity makes it difficult for people to engage in love authentically. When our ego is bruised, we may withdraw from others or become defensive, making it hard for relationships to develop in a healthy, open manner. Instead of being vulnerable and open to receiving love, we may protect ourselves by building walls around our hearts. This creates an emotional distance in relationships and limits the depth of connection. Love, in contrast, requires vulnerability. It calls us to expose our true selves, to be imperfect, to show our weaknesses without fear of judgment. It is only through vulnerability that we create authentic emotional bonds. Managing ego means acknowledging our insecurities without letting them control our actions, learning to accept rejection as a natural part of life, and allowing love to come in without constantly guarding ourselves against perceived threats. Another significant aspect of ego's influence on relationships is its impact on communication. Ego often fuels defensiveness, causing us to react impulsively when we feel criticized or misunderstood. Instead of listening openly and empathetically, we may feel the need to protect our image, defend our actions, or prove that we are right. This defensiveness can escalate conflicts, making it difficult to engage in productive dialogue or resolve disagreement. When our ego is in control, we focus more on winning the argument than on understanding the other person's point of view. In contrast, love fosters communication that is rooted in compassion and understanding. When we lead with love, we listen with an open heart, seeking to understand the feelings and needs of the other person rather than just defending our own position. Managing ego in communication involves pausing before reacting, being mindful of the impulse to defend oneself, and instead responding with empathy and respect. It requires us to move beyond our ego's need for validation and to engage in conversations that foster connection rather than division. Ego also plays a significant role in our expectations of others. The more ego-driven we are, the more likely we are to hold unrealistic expectations about how others should behave or what we deserve in relationships. These expectations can create pressure and frustration, as we may find ourselves disappointed when others do not meet our idealized standards. Our ego convinces us that we are entitled to certain behaviors, actions, or outcomes, leading us to view relationships as transactional. This mindset creates an environment where love is conditional, based on the fulfillment of specific needs or desires. True love, however, is unconditional. It does not demand that others meet our expectations, but instead allows space for individuals to be themselves, to grow, and to make mistakes. When we manage our ego, we begin to release these rigid expectations, allowing love to be more flexible and free-flowing. We begin to love others for who they are, not for what they can provide us. This shift in perspective allows us to embrace relationships with a sense of acceptance and gratitude, rather than disappointment or resentment. Control is another area where ego tends to take the reins in relationships. The desire to control outcomes, situations, or even other people can stem from ego's need for security, power, and dominance. When we are overly invested in controlling others, we risk stifling their growth and individuality. Ego-driven individuals may try to dictate how others should act, think, or feel in order to maintain a sense of power or to protect themselves from vulnerability. This controlling behavior can cause resentment and frustration in relationships, as it undermines the autonomy of the other person and creates an imbalanced dynamic. Love, however, thrives on mutual respect and trust. It requires us to relinquish the need for control and to trust in the process of the relationship. Managing ego involves recognizing when we are attempting to control others or a situation and choosing to step back. It means allowing love to unfold naturally, trusting that both parties will contribute to the relationship in meaningful ways. This openness creates space for the relationship to grow, unburdened by the weight of control or manipulation. The need for external validation and approval is another key way that ego interferes with love. When we seek validation from others, we put our emotional well-being in their hands, which can lead to feelings of insecurity and dependency. Ego-driven individuals may require constant praise, acknowledgement, or recognition in order to feel valued or loved. This need for validation can create unhealthy dynamics where love is conditioned on receiving external affirmation rather than being freely given. True love is grounded in self-acceptance and inner validation. When we manage our ego and stop seeking external approval, we begin to love ourselves for who we are, rather than for how others perceive us. This internal sense of worth allows us to offer love more freely without the expectation of receiving something in return. Love, when it comes from a place of self-worth and inner strength, becomes more generous, more genuine, and less dependent on external factors. Ego also manifests itself in comparison, which can be particularly detrimental to relationships. When we compare ourselves to others, whether it is in terms of success, appearance, or achievements, we set ourselves up for feelings of inadequacy or jealousy. This comparison creates division as we begin to see others as competitors rather than companions. In relationships, comparison can breed resentment and jealousy as we measure our worth against the successes or qualities of others. Love, on the other hand, encourages us to see the beauty and value in others without feeling threatened. It asks us to celebrate the unique qualities that each person brings to the table rather than comparing them to others. Managing ego means letting go of the need to measure ourselves against others, recognizing that each person has their own unique path and value. When we shift from comparison to appreciation, we create a more harmonious environment where love can flourish, free from the constraints of competition or envy. Finally, one of the most profound effects of ego on relationships is its tendency to create a sense of separation. Ego thrives on the illusion that we are separate from others, that we are distinct and unique, and that our experiences and perspectives are more important than those of others. This separation breeds conflict, isolation, and misunderstandings as we begin to view others as other, rather than as equal human beings. Love, however, calls us to transcend this sense of separation. It invites us to recognize our shared humanity, to see that we are all connected through common experiences and emotions. Managing ego means recognizing when it is driving us to isolate ourselves or distance ourselves from others, and choosing instead to approach relationships with a sense of unity and belonging. By embracing our shared humanity, we can deepen our connections and create relationships that are grounded in love, respect, and mutual understanding. When we transcend the illusion of separation, love can flow freely and unconditionally.